03:14 local time on November 12, 2025, a Russian night shift supervisor at the Ryazan oil refining complex was busy pouring his third cup of coffee, completely unaware that a Ukrainian long-range strike drone had been circling his facility for the last 11 minutes. In exactly 88 seconds, the distillation column he was monitoring, a critical piece of infrastructure responsible for processing 22% of the aviation fuel for the Western Military District, would cease to exist as a functional industrial asset. The supervisor checked his monitors, which showed standard pressure readings and nominal flow rates, oblivious to the fact that his quiet Tuesday morning was about to become a defining case study in modern asymmetric warfare. Above him at 4,000 feet, the Ukrainian-made Lyutyi drone was fighting a 30-knot crosswind, its Rotax engine humming at a frequency specifically tuned to blend in with the background noise of the heavy industrial machinery below. This was not a random act of harassment. It was the opening move of a synchronized offensive that would target over 50 strategic sites deep within the Russian Federation. The drone lurking in the darkness above Ryazan was a marvel of pragmatic engineering, representing a masterclass in cost-effective lethality. While Russian defense contractors were busy billing the state millions for hypersonic missiles that may or may not work, Ukrainian engineers had taken a different approach. They built a slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly accurate flying bomb using commercial-grade components that you could technically buy online if you knew where to look. The airframe was constructed from fiberglass and epoxy composites, materials that reflect radar waves about as well as a wet cardboard box, giving it a radar cross-section similar to a large seagull. Its guidance system did not rely solely on satellite navigation, which the Russians had been jamming with increasing desperation across the entire European theater. Instead, this particular variant was equipped with a terrain reference navigation system, essentially a digital map stored on an onboard hard drive that allowed the drone to see the ground using a radar altimeter, matching the terrain contours against its internal database. It was flying blind to GPS, but perfectly aware of its location relative to the ground, immune to the electronic noise being pumped out by the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare systems stationed 10 miles to the south. The path to this target had been plotted with the kind of meticulous detail usually reserved for a moon landing. The operators back in Ukraine had routed the drone through a complex web of radar shadows, utilizing the curvature of the Earth and the natural valleys of the Russian landscape to hide its approach. For 6 hours, the drone had traveled at a leisurely 90 miles per hour, crossing 500 miles of hostile airspace without triggering a single alert. It had skirted the engagement envelopes of 3 separate S-400 batteries, exploiting the known downtime schedules of Russian radar crews. Information likely provided by a network of partisans or purchased from corrupt officials who valued hard currency over operational security. The math was brutal for the defenders. They had to be lucky every single second of every single day to stop these attacks, while the Ukrainian drone only had to be lucky once. And tonight, luck was entirely on the side of the attacker. The drone's 75-pound warhead was not massive by military standards, but it did not need to be. When you can place a shaped charge within 2 meters of a pressurized catalytic cracker, physics does the rest of the heavy lifting for you. As the clock ticked down to 03:15, the drone's onboard flight computer initiated its terminal dive sequence. The engine throttled back to reduce the acoustic signature, turning the aircraft into a silent glider for the final approach. This was the most dangerous phase of the mission. The drone had to drop from its cruising altitude of 4,000 feet down to just 200 feet, bringing it well within the range of the Pantsir-S1 air defense systems protecting the refinery. The Russian radar operators should have seen it. The Pantsir's phased array radar is theoretically capable of tracking targets moving at twice the speed of sound, yet it struggled to lock onto a slow-moving composite glider coming in at a steep angle. The operators in the control vehicle were likely fatigued, staring at screens filled with the static clutter of a busy industrial zone. By the time the automated systems finally registered a high-priority threat and slewed the 30mm cannons toward the incoming vector, the geometry of the engagement was already hopeless. The drone was inside the minimum engagement range, moving too low and too fast relative to the ground clutter for the radar to maintain a solid lock. At 03:16 and 4 seconds, the Lyutyi drone impacted the primary fractionation tower with absolute precision. The explosion was not the Hollywood-style fireball that most people expect, at least not initially. The primary detonation punched a hole through 3 inches of reinforced steel, instantly depressurizing a vessel containing superheated crude oil vapor at 400 degrees Celsius. The sudden drop in pressure caused the liquid inside to flash boil into an explosive vapor cloud that expanded outward at supersonic speeds. Less than a second later, this fuel-air mixture found an ignition source, likely a hot pipe or a spark from the tearing metal. And the real destruction began. A massive secondary explosion ripped through the facility, shattering windows 3 miles away and sending a column of black smoke 2,000 feet into the night air. The shockwave knocked the coffee cup out of the shift supervisor's hand and threw him against the control panel, his screens instantly flashing red with hundreds of catastrophic failure warnings. But this strike was just the beginning. Across the breadth of Western Russia, from the fuel depots of Rostov to the microelectronics factories of Tula, dozens of similar drones were entering their final attack runs. This coordinated strike package was the culmination of months of intelligence gathering and technological refinement. Ukrainian planners had realized by late 2024 that hitting the front lines was not enough. They had to strangle the logistics that kept the Russian war machine fed. They identified over 50 critical nodes, refineries, ammo dumps, and specialized manufacturing plants that represented the bottlenecks of the Russian industrial base. The beauty of this strategy lay in its economic asymmetry. The drone that just vaporized a $50 million distillation tower cost roughly $45,000 to build. That is a return on investment of over 10,000%. Even if the Russians managed to shoot down 80% of the incoming wave, the cost of the interceptor missiles alone would exceed the cost of the entire drone fleet. And the remaining 20% of drones that got through would cause billions of dollars in damage and months of downtime. It was a strategy of attrition where the attacker held all the financial cards. The Russians were being forced to use million-dollar missiles to shoot down flying lawnmowers, a sustainable exchange rate only for the side building the lawnmowers. The scale of this offensive became apparent as dawn broke over the region. Social media channels began to flood with videos filmed by terrified locals, showing plumes of smoke rising from multiple strategic locations. In the Voronezh region, a swarm of 5 drones targeted a major ammunition storage facility. Here, the Russians were better prepared. They had deployed electronic warfare jammers that scrambled GPS signals across a 50-mile radius, creating a navigational dead zone that should have blinded any incoming threat. But the Ukrainian engineers had anticipated this. These newer drones were equipped with optical terminal guidance, a system that uses a small camera and an onboard AI processor to visually identify the target in the final moments of flight. As the drones entered the jammed airspace, their satellite link severed. The AI took over. It compared the view from the camera with reference images of the ammo dump stored in its memory. It recognized the specific shape of the storage bunkers, ignoring the camouflage netting and decoy heat sources the Russians had set up. The first drone took a hit from a heavy machine gun and spiraled into the trees, but the remaining 4 adjusted their flight paths autonomously, spacing themselves out to strike different sectors of the depot simultaneously. The impact at Voronezh was seismic. One of the drones managed to penetrate a hardened concrete bunker storing 152mm artillery shells. The shaped charge warhead jetted through the reinforced door like a hot knife through butter, igniting the propellant charges stacked inside. The resulting earth-shattering kaboom registered as a 2.3 magnitude seismic event on sensors hundreds of miles away. It wasn't just an explosion, it was a chain reaction. Cook-offs from the burning munitions sent shrapnel and unexploded ordnance flying into adjacent storage areas, starting fires that would burn for 3 days. The local fire brigades could do nothing but set up a perimeter and watch it burn, as the heat was intense enough to melt the asphalt on the approach roads. This single strike effectively erased the artillery supply for an entire Russian army corps for 2 weeks. And while the physical damage was immense, the psychological impact was even greater. The message was clear. There was no safe harbor. No matter how deep inside Russia you were, no matter how many air defense systems you parked outside the gate, you were reachable. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the north, a different kind of drama was unfolding near a specialized microelectronics plant in the Tula region. This target was smaller, but arguably more valuable than the massive fuel tanks or ammo dumps. This facility produced the guidance chips for Russia's precision-guided munitions. Taking it offline would bottleneck missile production for months. The attack here utilized a different vector entirely. Instead of a swarm, a single high-speed jet-powered drone, a modified Paleonitsia, was streaking toward the target at 400 miles per hour. This was not a slow glider. It was a cruise missile in all but name, and powered by a small turbojet engine that gulped fuel at a ferocious rate, but provided the speed necessary to punch through heavy air defenses. The Russian radar operators tracked it, but the engagement window was razor-thin. At that speed, the drone crossed the entire engagement zone of a Tor M2 system in less than 40 seconds. The air defense crew managed to fire 2 missiles, but the drone performed a high-G barrel roll maneuver programmed specifically to bleed the energy of incoming interceptors. It was a move that stressed the composite airframe to its breaking point, the wings flexing alarmingly under the G-forces. The first Russian interceptor missile exploded 50 meters behind the drone, the shrapnel shredding the drone's rear stabilizer but failing to hit the engine or the warhead. The drone shuddered violently, its flight computer fighting to maintain stability with damaged control surfaces. It began to roll to the left, losing altitude rapidly. For a moment, it looked like the mission was a failure, a pile of expensive debris about to plow into a potato field. But the guidance software compensated, applying full deflection to the remaining ailerons and throttling the engine to maximum power to power through the instability. It was flying sideways, leaking hydraulic fluid, and screaming like a banshee, but it was still on course. The target building, a sterile clean room facility with a distinct white roof, loomed ahead. The drone didn't have the altitude to dive, so it went for a direct horizontal impact. It slammed into the side of the building at 380 miles per hour. The kinetic energy alone enough to compromise the structure before the 50-pound warhead even detonated. The blast collapsed the roof of the clean room, exposing delicate lithography machines worth tens of millions of dollars to the dust, smoke, and fire of the outside world. But the systematic dismantling of the Russian war machine did not stop with factories and fuel depots. At 0500 hours, just as the fires in Ryazan and Tula were being upgraded to 5-alarm catastrophes, a second wave of Ukrainian drones crossed the border, targeting the electrical backbone of the Russian industrial West. The target was the 500 kilovolt substation at Kaluga, a critical node that steps down high-voltage transmission lines for regional distribution. These transformers are massive, oil-filled beasts weighing over 200 tons, custom-built with lead times of up to 18 months. You cannot just pick one up at the local hardware store. When a drone carrying 50 pounds of high explosive impacts the cooling fins of a transformer, it punctures the oil reservoir and ignites the mineral oil inside, creating a fire that burns at temperatures hot enough to weaken the structural steel of the gantry towers. The initial strike at Kaluga didn't just knock out power to a few neighborhoods, it tripped safety relays across 3 adjacent oblasts, causing a cascading grid failure that plunged nearly 2 million people. And more importantly, 4 major defense contractors into darkness. The backup generators at these plants take time to spin up, and for delicate manufacturing processes involving chemical reactions or precision heating, a sudden power cut ruins entire batches of production. The brilliance of targeting the electrical grid lay not in the immediate blackout, but in the logistical nightmare it created. Russian repair crews were already stretched thin, and replacing a custom-built high-voltage transformer is a monumental engineering task even in peacetime. Under the threat of constant double-tap strikes, where a second drone hits the same target 30 minutes later to kill the repair crews, maintenance becomes a lethal profession. The psychological toll on the utility workers was immense. By attacking the power infrastructure supporting the military-industrial complex, Ukraine forced Russia to divert precious air defense assets away from the front lines in the Donbass to protect substations deep in the rear. Every Pantsir-S1 system parked next to a transformer in Kaluga was one less system shooting at Ukrainian jets over the front lines. It was a masterclass in strategic dilemma. Protect the army or protect the economy? The Kremlin tried to do both and ended up doing neither effectively, leaving gaps in their air defense coverage wide enough to drive a truck through, or in this case, a swarm of slow-moving propeller drones. As the sun fully rose, the scale of the operation's success became impossible to hide. Commercial satellite imagery providers began uploading high-resolution photos of the targeted sites, confirming significant damage at over 38 distinct locations. At the Engels 2 airbase, home to the strategic bomber fleet, the imagery revealed the scorched silhouette of a Tu-95 Bear bomber on the tarmac. These aircraft are the dinosaurs of the Cold War, irreplaceable nuclear-capable assets that Russia relies on for missile launches. A drone costing less than a mid-range sedan had managed to penetrate the layered air defense of a strategic nuclear base and damage an asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The drone didn't even need to destroy the bomber completely. Shrapnel tearing through the fuselage and avionics bays renders the airframe unflyable for months. In the calculus of attrition, trading a $20,000 drone for the indefinite grounding of a strategic bomber is a trade that would make any military accountant weep with joy. The visible scorch marks on the tarmac were a testament to the fact that Russia's vaunted air defense umbrella was more like a colander, full of holes and leaking everywhere. The economic repercussions of these strikes began to ripple through the Russian economy within days. The hit on the Ryazan refinery, combined with strikes on 2 other fuel depots in the south, effectively took 15% of Russia's refining capacity offline overnight. In a country that runs on oil exports and diesel-hungry tanks, this was a critical blow. Wholesale fuel prices in the Moscow region spiked by 40% within 48 hours. The Russian government was forced to implement emergency export bans to keep domestic prices stable, further cutting into the revenue streams needed to fund the war. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. No single strike won the war, but the cumulative effect of 50 deep strikes created a logistical friction that slowed everything down. Tanks at the front waited longer for fuel. Artillery units rationed shells because the ammo dump in Voronezh was still smoldering. The factories building replacement parts were dark because the substation in Kaluga was a twisted wreck of copper and steel. The friction was palpable, grinding the gears of the Russian military machine to a halt. By the time the smoke cleared in late November 2025, the Deep Strike campaign had rewritten the rules of engagement. It proved that a smaller nation, utilizing asymmetric technology and precise intelligence, could hold a superpower's strategic infrastructure hostage. The 50-plus strikes didn't end the war that winter, but they fundamentally altered the trajectory of the conflict. They forced Russia to internalize the cost of the war, bringing the fire and destruction from the trenches of Ukraine to the doorsteps of the factories in Tula and the refineries in Ryazan. As winter set in, the Russian logistics officers looked at their burning depots and frozen supply lines and realized that the cold was the least of their worries. The real problem was the buzzing sound in the sky, the sound of a cheap plastic drone carrying a shaped charge and a one-way ticket to the nearest fuel tank. And as for the Russian leadership, they were left with a very expensive lesson in modern warfare. Occupying land is easy, but holding on to your own infrastructure when the enemy can reach out and touch it from 500 miles away is a whole different ballgame.